So in this video, I actually want to talk about the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller because I actually never did a review on this product, and I actually want to do a review on the Pro Controller. So anyway, in this video, let's go ahead and talk about the Pro Controller. And in this video, I actually want to answer the question, is this controller worth the money and who should buy this controller? I've had this controller pretty much ever since the launch of the Nintendo Switch, so I'm very comfortable with this controller. I probably spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours with this controller specifically, so I know everything about the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller. First off, of course, let's talk about price of this controller because that is going to be the #1 factor if you're going to buy this controller or not buy this controller. And I must admit, this controller is quite expensive for what you're getting. This controller retails new in the US for $70. So you can see it's $10 more than your average controller for other systems like the PS4 or the Xbox One. Their controllers only go for $60 brand new, as this controller goes for $70 brand new. But you do have to take in consideration there is quite a lot of tech inside this controller than it just looking like a standard controller for a game system. First of all, you do have NFC support, so if you use your Amiibos, you will get NFC support, and that's saying a lot because not a lot of controllers out there actually do support NFC for the Amiibo support. So if you use them a lot, this is something to take in consideration because, like I said again, it does have NFC support for the Amiibos. On top of that, it does have a gyro, so that's very nice. So games that do support gyro controls, which there are quite a few, believe it or not, you will have it in this controller. And then alongside that, you also do have HD Rumble, which is Nintendo's fancy rumble system for their controllers. So you can see there is a lot of tech inside this controller specifically, and maybe that's why Nintendo decided to charge $10 more than your average controller, so that could be the reason. But either way, it's still a very expensive controller for what it is. So let's actually talk about the design, the function, features, and everything like that. Now, when it comes to this controller specifically, there's nothing too crazy about this controller, I will have to admit. It's pretty much your standard affair when it comes to video game controllers. It looks like your average video game controller, and overall it is built very well. Now, the type of material that Nintendo decided to go on when it comes to this controller is going to be an all plastic build. Just keep that in mind. So this thing, I don't know how well it would handle if you threw this thing on the ground or beat it up and things like that, but just take that into consideration when you're buying this. This thing is made out of all plastic, and the sides are kind of like this rubbery material. So on the two grips that you hold it on, it does have good padding, and there are grips, so you definitely feel secure in your hand when you're actually using this, so it won't feel like it's slipping out of your hand, you're going to drop it or anything like that. So props to Nintendo for actually putting some grips on the side of this thing. But overall, it does feel very nice in the hand. And overall, what can I say about this controller specifically? All I can say is the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller is a very nice controller, and even if you are going to pay the $70 for this controller, I think you are going to get your money's worth out of this controller. It has all the features that the Nintendo Switch support. Like I said, it has gyro, NFC, and HD Rumble, and it also has a capture button. It also has a home button. It pretty much has every button the Nintendo Switch has to offer when it comes to this controller. And the cool thing about this controller, I do know this for a factor, this thing does run off of Bluetooth. So if you ever wanted to use this on things like the PC or other products that do run off of Bluetooth, you can actually use it on those products as well. So it's not just limited to the Switch. You can actually use it anywhere else. So that's very cool as well. It basically has a pairing button on the top. You hold down the pairing button, the 4 blinking lights on the bottom will start rapidly blinking, and then you can pair it to pretty much anything you want to. And this controller is going to be good, especially if you play a lot of Steam games and you want a good solid controller for Steam games. This may be an option to actually consider. Now, I've had this, like I said, for about a year, 2 years, 3 years, pretty much since the Nintendo Switch came out, and I've had no problems with my controller. My controller still is in very good condition. I've had no button problems, I have no stick problems, I've had no drifting problems, because I know a lot of people have drifting problems, whether it's on the Joy-Cons that come with your Switch or the Pro controllers. The Nintendo Switch controllers in general are prone to having this drifting issue more so than any other controllers known to man in history in video games. game history, but I've had no problems there. The nice thing about this controller, which I didn't even mention yet, of course, this is a wireless controller, and this does have some of the most amazing battery life you can actually get out of a modern day controller. I'm talking about 40 hours, and since this thing does get roughly 40 hours, I only have to charge this thing like once a week or once every other week. It really just depends on how much I actually use this controller and how much I actually play my Nintendo Switch, but the battery life is flat out amazing with this, and that's the one reason you would go with this option over other options on the market that are third-party controllers, because, well, the battery life is flat out amazing. You just charge it and then you pretty much don't have to think about it for about a week or a week and a half. Again, depends on how long you play your Nintendo Switch, so that's flat out amazing. Nintendo actually figured out the game when it comes to the battery life on this, and of course this has a rechargeable battery in it. You just plug in a USB Type-C to your dock if you're on dock, or you can, I think you can actually plug it into the wall as well on like a USB wall wart that comes with your smartphone, your tablet, or whatever the case may be, and then you can charge it like that. And props to Nintendo for actually allowing this to be USB Type-C. So it looks like Nintendo understands their peripherals and their accessories and things like that, and they're pretty much just making everything across the board USB Type-C. So of course that's going to be very convenient, since of course the Nintendo Switch is already USB Type-C compatible, the main unit, and then on top of that, a lot of other things that we do own nowadays are moving towards that USB Type-C future, whether it's smartphones, tablets, or computers, or even headphones. You're good to go there. So most likely you may already have a USB Type-C cable laying around that you could use on this, so that's very good that you don't have to use some type of weird proprietary cable with this Pro controller. You can pretty much use any standard USB Type-C controller on this actual controller. And the other question is this actually my favorite controller of all time? I know a lot of people actually love the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. Me, myself, I do actually love this controller a lot. Is it my favorite controller of all time? It's really hard to say if it's my favorite controller. Is it my favorite modern day controller? That's also really hard to speak on. I will have to admit though, I definitely love this controller in my opinion over the Xbox One controller, and I did use the Xbox One controller for about, I think, a year or two, so I own the Xbox One, and my experience with that controller was flat out amazing, and that is a good controller. Not trying to knock the Xbox One controller like it's a bad controller or anything, but for me, if I had to compare the two, I would definitely take the Pro controller from Nintendo, just because I love the way the sticks feel. In particular, I think the sticks here are a little bit nicer, the way they feel and the way they move, and the travel distance and the way they're raised up on the controller compared to an Xbox One controller. That's just me. Now, when it comes to comparing this to something like the PS4 controller, I actually really do love the PS4 controller. I think the sticks on there are pretty nice. I love the way it feels in the hand. Overall, I do love that controller as well, but maybe this does have a slight edge over that controller, because the one thing that this does have, which I do like about this controller, is the fact that it really does feel premium in the hand. The weight is very distributed very evenly. It doesn't feel too cheap. You know, when you get certain objects, you feel like they're a little bit too cheap in the hand. Also, it fits nicely in the hand, and I've had no discomfort as well, because I've actually had other controllers in the past, for instance, like the Ouya controller. You may not even know what Ouya is, but Ouya controllers were kind of uncomfortable, to be honest. And then on top of that, I do remember I did own a Wii U pretty much for a long time, and the Wii U Pro controller specifically was not my favorite controller. It was pretty much a copycat of this in some variations, but for the most part, I didn't actually like that controller. It was okay, but it was too plasticky in the hands. And then on top of that, I played a lot of Smash Brothers with that. I know that's probably a sin to a lot of you to play Smash Brothers with some type of Pro controller instead of a GameCube controller. I get it, but anyway, the problem with it was, after I played the Wii U Pro controller so long, especially with Smash Brothers, my hands actually started to hurt. That's just me personally. Of course, that would have depended on a lot of different factors, but for me, it did hurt my hands, and overall, that one felt a little bit too plasticky and a little bit too cheap, in my opinion. But yes, I pretty much love everything about this controller specifically, and this one definitely is worth $70. Now, the question is, who should actually buy this controller? before I talk about that, actually, now that I think about it, I actually want to talk about some of the cons. There's not really any cons with this controller. I guess the only con, which a lot of people do talk about when it comes to this controller, is the actual D-pad of this controller. The D-pad of this is a little bit too hard for a lot of people's taste, but for me personally, I've had no problems with this D-pad, and this is a very good D-pad for what it is. Is it the best D-pad in the world? Nope, it's not the best D-pad in the world. Now that I think about it, I will have to admit a lot of people are right. It is slightly too stiff. It could have been a little bit not as stiff if you ever used this. It's hard to really portray it on camera since you're not feeling the D-pad for yourself, but that's really the only part of this that's slightly bad. When I mean slightly, it's not that big a deal. It's not like it's garbage. It's definitely not like Xbox 360. You guys remember the Xbox 360 D-pad? The Xbox 360 D-pad was utter garbage, and that was the worst D-pad pretty much of all time, so it's nowhere near that quality of badness, but it could have been slightly better. Kind of disappointing, but overall, that's really my only con with this controller. Maybe another con, which some people do argue it kind of sucks with Nintendo, is the fact that this doesn't have any headphone jack on the bottom like modern day controllers, like a PS4 controller or an Xbox One controller. You guys know there is a headphone jack at the bottom, and with Nintendo Switch games, a lot of the free-to-play games now, or a lot of the games on Switch now, do support native voice chat, so it does suck. You do have to plug in your headphones directly to the Nintendo Switch, whether it's in the dock or whether it's to the system after you're playing in handheld mode. That is kind of an inconvenience. That does suck, but it is what it is, and that's really the only downside to this controller. Overall, it is a very good go, and like I said, for most people, I think you'll still be satisfied if you pay $70 for this thing. And a lot of times you do have to realize too, this thing goes on sale a lot, and you can find this at different retailers on sale, and you can probably find this used as well if someone's willing to get rid of it. You can find this controller a lot of different places. And one nice thing about this controller, I did forget to mention, it's one of these controllers that will actually turn on the system from a distance. So for instance, your Nintendo Switch is on your entertainment system. You come home from wherever, you sit down on your couch, the controller's right beside you. All you do is you press the home button down, and then after you press the home button down, it will turn on the Nintendo Switch. And on top of that, the nice thing with the Nintendo Switch, you may not even know this, is the fact that it'll even turn on your TV as well. If you just press the home button, if you have your Nintendo Switch set up in the settings to turn on your TV as well, you just press the button and it will turn on your TV. And I do that almost 100% of the time, or I do that every single time I use my Nintendo Switch in the dock. I just press the home button, it turns on my TV, it also turns on the Nintendo Switch, and you're good to go. The reason I had to point that out in this video is also if you buy a lot of third-party controllers, you actually don't get that benefit of actually being able to control the system from a distance, and you can't actually turn on the system. It's very weird about third-party options. So if you're a person that's lazy, or if you just want that benefit of that feature, the Nintendo Switch Pro controller will have that feature as well when it comes to features and when it comes to things that Nintendo Switch Pro controller does support. But now let's get back to my question. Who is this controller actually for, and who should buy this controller? Obviously, this controller is for people who play on the dock. It depends on how much you play in the dock, and it depends on how much you're willing to spend, because it's not like the Joy-Cons that come in the box are utter garbage and not playable. But for me personally, with a lot of games, and if you're playing in the dock exclusively, I would personally say try to get some type of Pro controller. And like I said again many times, this thing does go on sale a lot of the times, and you can find this used different places and things like that. So if you play in the dock a lot, I honestly would recommend it, and I think you're still going to get your money worth. But I understand this thing is a very expensive controller, and of course, if you're a person that doesn't play in the dock maybe once a week, or maybe you only play in handheld mode all the time, or whatever the case may be, then of course this is not for you, and this is a product you shouldn't buy. Even if you're a person that does play in tabletop mode a lot, I still wouldn't recommend buying this thing, because it's $70 and you're only playing in tabletop mode. You're better off doing what Nintendo planned you to do. You're better off taking off the Joy-Cons and actually using them in the Joy-Con grip, and then actually go about it that way. So there is that. But overall, I can highly recommend this to most Nintendo Switch owners. You're going to get your money's worth out of this controller. It's a very solid controller. I like everything about this controller. All the pros outweigh the cons. There's no really cons to this controller. Overall, this is a certified, really good Nintendo Switch controller. The only downside to this controller is if you're going to buy multiple Nintendo Switch Pro controllers, this may not be the best option for you, just because, well, like I said, this thing is going for $70, and that's quite expensive for what this controller is. And you do have to realize as well, there is a lot of good third-party controllers on the market. Now, when it comes to third-party controllers for the Nintendo Switch, I'm not the person to actually ask, since I haven't actually had any experience or any exposure to third-party controllers on the Nintendo Switch. But if you look around the internet and you look around YouTube and different places, you will find people who generally do review third-party controllers. And there's always this weird misconception when it comes to third-party controllers. I don't know why this is, but a lot of people think that third-party controllers always have to suck and always have to have the attachment of, oh, they just suck because they're third party. They're not officially licensed products from the companies who made the game system or made the system or whatever the case may be. But nowadays, a lot of third party options are getting very good, and there is some that can actually go head to head with the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, believe it. And the good thing about these third party options, a lot of them are going to be much cheaper than the Pro controller. So there's something to take in consideration as well when you go to buy your Pro controller for your system, just because, well, there's a lot of good third-party options nowadays. Of course, you have to sit through all the junk. For every good controller, there's always going to be a bad controller, and not every third-party controller is going to be a winner. But there's some very good third-party options that are almost worth picking up over the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. It just really depends on what type of features you like as well, because when it comes to third-party controllers on the Switch, a lot of these third-party controllers will miss things like NFC for amiibo support, HD rumble, and gyro support. So you do have to take those into considerations, and you do have to look at the set list to see what type of features you want from your controller for the Nintendo Switch. So yeah, there's a lot of different options, but yeah, like I said, this controller is definitely a certified go in my book, and you definitely won't be disappointed if you do end up buying the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne from My Tech News, signing out.